everyone. This is John Lee, your local real estate agent here in the greater Philadelphia area. I'm here with Donny Cho, a true mentor of mine, a spiritual mentor of mine. Man, we just go way back. But for
Way
our
back.
listeners, yeah, for our listeners, Donny, tell me about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, my name is Donny Cho. I'm currently the lead pastor of a family of churches called Metro. We're based in Philadelphia, launched in East Falls in 2012. We have a second site that we just launched in 2019, praying through a number of third and fourth sites, and trying to kind of figure out where we're going with all of this right now. I was a bivocational minister for close to 10 years, working at Johnson& and Johnson for most of those years as just in a business marketing technology leadership there. And yeah, it was one of those things. One thing kind of fed into the other as I was leading in the business space. That helped to pay the bills and support me and my family, so that every dollar that we made that came in could help to fulfill the vision that we had for Metro as a church and as a family of churches. So Lord's really provided a lot, and just grateful to be here.
Yeah, this is so awesome. I mean, we could spend hours talking about what you do and how you help the community. But for our listeners, if you can just go way back to, you know, your upbringing, right? From your life as a child to now, what is your story, Donnie?
Yeah, I mean, long story short, my parents were probably one of the earlier immigrants into the United States. They resided in Philadelphia. My father was an engineer, recruited here in the United States. My mother was a nurse and a teacher in a nursing college in Korea. And it was really supposed to be a short stint here in the United States. My father was unfortunately murdered. We lived right off of, gosh, I mean, probably closer to Temple University in my childhood, my early childhood. I still have memories of the place in the area, but he was shot and murdered after a mugging incident that happened probably a little while prior to that. The person was sentenced for at least life in prison without parole, but on death row. And there's been a lot of commotion actually in the last couple of years around that one particular trial. But because he currently there's a whole racial divide in the city. And with the DA trying to retry cases that had taken place years ago where racism potentially could have been involved. And so um, that trial was actually retried several years ago, right before COVID hit. And
Whoa, that's
again,
crazy.
it kind of threw our family for a loop, but because he was a very dangerous man. But in actuality, we won the trial again, that was an interesting kind of turn of events for our family. But that it kind of brought us all the way back. After we resided in Philadelphia, my mom gave up her career as a nurse to raise her children. Essentially, I grew up in the Philadelphia area. I went to Plymouth White Marsh High School. Lived on Fifth Street, where most Koreans lived during that era as well. My mother eventually, after I graduated high school, moved to South Jersey. And during that period of time, I was in the summertime, because we didn't do a lot as a family in the summertime except go to church. Not a whole lot of vacations. I mean, my mom was pretty much working a full-time job, building a business, just trying to keep her family alive, I suppose. But she sent me to a camp as a child. It was a Bible camp called Pioneers for Christ. I grew up at the camp since the age of seven, I think the age of 7 or 8, and I grew up all the way through into high school and so on and so forth. Into college, I served there as a counselor, eventually became one of the directors of the camp, and then eventually became the executive director as a formalized 501(c)(3) nonprofit. And yeah, technically it's still running. Right now, we're going through a lot of changes. COVID kind of put a damper on the entire project. But up until that point, I mean, we were really in our golden years during that period. All the while I was studying in Boston. I went to college in Boston, went to grad school in Boston, was working in Boston, felt the call to come back, to Philadelphia. I just always loved the city. And I had a really newfound just love for the city as I became more faithful as a Christian, and in the church. had my first taste of church planting when I left a church that I was at for almost 10 years in Boston to join a church plant in the PCA, which is the Presbyterian denomination, conservative Presbyterian denomination. There, really, really fell in love with the whole church planting model. Came back to Philadelphia, was working, was going to go to law school, but decided not to go to law school. I think I got into two out of three schools. I was waiting on the third.
Mhm.
I think that's what it was. And then during that time, I think just providentially, I came across a ton of people that it was very clear to me I shouldn't go to law school. And so I deferred for a year. Then I decided not to go altogether. And there I am, now consulting in business. I started attending school just to learn. And that was pretty much a small seminary program that was reformed in education and in doctrine. And then somehow the Lord kind of led me into ministry. And that's kind of where I am today.
Dude, this is so awesome. Like most people don't know the whole backdrop of everything. I mean, I even briefly know like tidbits of it because me being a camp member of PFC, I still remember like the talks of it. Like you're kind of keeping it on the hush hush. Like, hey, like, we're starting a church, we're starting a church, and you go from being in a corporate setting, right? You're going from a corporate setting to being a leader of a camp ministry, right? And then now obviously a church. Like, tell me, how do you balance all those things, and how do you live life? And you're a
That's a
father
great
now.
question. Yeah, I recently, we got married somewhere in what as Metro before Metro was planted. I got married in 2010
Right.
and just happily married. And we recently had a child, kind of on a personal note, my wife and I probably experienced four bouts of miscarriages during that period. We lost probably a total of seven or eight children. And it was bewildering for me. I mean, I ran a camp that probably had thousands of kids that ran through the camp, and all of them I just absolutely love. I mean, I love the experience that we have there, and I actually really miss running camp these days. But we didn't have any children of our own, and we gave up pretty much a couple years prior to my son actually being born. And then, of course, we decided to give it one more shot. And my wife got pregnant with David, and that's I guess kind of the beginning of that story. I guess at the end of that chapter, the beginning of a new chapter. Yeah, I mean, super busy. COVID also made things incredibly more complex.
Right.
Um, the way I've kind of handled things was, knowing I did a lot of work on both ends, and trying to establish appropriate rest rhythms in my life took a long time, but I have really, really dedicated rest rhythms in my life, where I just worship personally, really keep up with my own personal character in life. You have to rest well. So I spend a tremendous amount of time with family every night. But I also dedicate time for work throughout the day. I work a very, very full day every day. When I was working two jobs, the days were just a little bit longer, but that was prior to my son really being born, and my wife she could shift. And so we made it work. We made sure that we had date nights every week. I'm actually more religious about that than she is sometimes. But those kind of things, you gotta maintain the pillars in your life that are really, really important. And when people ask me, how do you manage your time? I generally wake up, even before I go to bed, I have, four goals for the next day that are non-negotiable. But they have to be achievable. And they're usually at the professional level, so in ministry or at the professional level. And then you also have, personal goals that you have, things that you want to just do as a family or personally. And you have to make sure that there is incredible balance there. If any of those things, if you work when you should be resting, and if you're resting when you should be working, life gets thrown out of balance. The Bible speaks about that everywhere. And I think part of just the discipline of 48 years of life is you learn what's important in life, and you're led by your values. And I feel like just in our conversation, you yourself has been that's essentially what I hear you saying. And for me personally, it took a while to get to a place where I really recognize and hold fast to the things that I value most, and I pursue it.
Right.
And you'll find a time afforded to you.
Yeah, dude, Donnie, that's so encouraging. I know one of the things that you might not even know that I know is that during the COVID period of time, um, one thing I've noticed with Metro is that they're extremely innovative, right? I know that like even during PFC days, you guys were always trying to think like forward, right? Like forward thinking, right? One of the things that I thought was truly encouraging was when you guys were posting your sermons online, you were doing a lot of social media content. Like this was in preparation of COVID and during COVID. And then from what I heard, overheard from other people is that by the time, COVID kind of settled, membership just started to increase. And I use that focal point even in my community in my church and saying, hey, like listen guys, like let's not make COVID an excuse, right, on why we're having these issues. Like if we use COVID as an excuse, then it stops, right? Like there's no solution, right? It just stops. But if we
Yeah,
ask, how can we do it? How can we get better? It continues, right? And then our train of thought actually becomes more progressive, if that makes any sense, right?
that's right.
So, I mean, can you elaborate on that? Like how you think and what your thought process was? I mean, that's just a
Yeah.
small example, but very innovative.
That's really keen, I think, on your end. I can tell you from two perspectives. One, being a professional, because I was still at J&J at the time,
Right.
and I can tell you how we thought there, and I can tell you how we were at church as well. And I'll start with church because that's where my heart was. And when COVID hit, nobody knew what to expect. I'll tell you a stupid story. We had a church-wide retreat. That was probably going to be our biggest church-wide retreat ever. And it was planned for that May.
Right.
And we all knew that COVID was going to go a long time, but I still kept the dates of the retreat and the deposit and everything as if like it was just going to end miraculously in like 8 weeks and we could just do this retreat. I mean, look back on that, how foolish was that, right? But everybody had this inner hope that it was just going to go away.
Uh-huh.
And there was no way that it was, people were dying by the hundreds of thousands. And we just knew that this was going to take a long, long time to work out.
Right.
And so at some point in April, we kind of woke up and it was very, very early on. I needed about 3 weeks, I think, to kind of reorient like what's going on in the world.
Right.
But right around April, our team got together and we said, look, the most important thing that we got to do right now as a church is just care for our people. We got to preach and worship faithfully and figure out a way where they can still worship faithfully.
Right.
I read stuff from Francis Grimke, who's a Reformed Presbyterian minister in the 1900s when the Spanish flu hit. Martin Luther, when he was living through the plague. I was digging up all sorts of stuff and how they viewed pandemics and when they hit, what did they teach about worship and how did they care for their people? And so one of the conclusions that I made was, I wasn't even thinking about numbers. For me, it was more, let's just hope that people stay alive because we weren't sure what this was.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
secondly, let's just reach them and give them, just encourage them, strengthen them, because they're going to be either bored out of their mind or and stir crazy, or they're going to be nervous and scared and they got children and they don't know what to do. My son was born right at the start of COVID, March 28th. So
Right.
about 2 weeks into the lockdown. And so um, we said, hey, we're going to double down on just caring for people and let's have fun with this. And that's what we did. We formed a team and the team went buck wild. I mean, they just had so much fun thinking of ways that we can really engage our community online, because that's the one thing everybody was doing. And the other part was then on the pastoral front we mobilized our congregation to really just reach out and just love and care for people. And that's one thing that our church, I think we're a pretty hospitable team and
Right.
people we're known for just having a lot of warm people in our congregation. So people just jumped all over that. And I think when you put the two together and we said, you know what, one thing we could do is we could take this time to regroup and strategize. So while all that was going on in the front, our pastoral team and our directors in the background, we just planned for, hey, we have a free year
Mm-hmm.
because we're not using the building. Let's just take that year to really focus on what the future could look like for the church.
Mhm.
And so that was in many ways for me, God's a godsend because I was so busy. I never had the time to stop and really strategize with a whole team of people over a long period of time. I felt like we were on like a half a year retreat together, just figuring out where God is leading us and calling us. And that's what we did. And one by one, all the pieces start to fall in place. God was starting to pave ways and open doors for people to really step in there and really just kind of push this thing forward. When the lockdown started to come to an end, I was like scared. I was like, it's so weird having people back in the congregation again.
Right.
Are they even going to come back? And when we opened the doors, it was like I think we doubled the size of our congregation in a matter of like 3 or 4 months. And currently we have about 400 people total congregation over two sites. And looking at, we were probably a third of that size at the time when the lockdown happened. And so, yeah, I'll say that on the professional front, it was very similar. At J&J, we gave the first thing they did was they said, we just want to make sure our people are okay. And so they gave us 2 weeks, pretty much a free 2 week vacation, essentially, to just care for your family and set the right rhythms in place. And, if you have to take a meeting, do it, but we want you to know that you have time and you have freedom to go and check on your family and make things work. If you're going to work from home now and you have a newborn, you got to figure out how that rhythm's going to look. So the
Right.
first 2 weeks was filled with that. And then we said as a team of leaders, let's not look back. You know, we've been talking about e-commerce and social commerce for the last 2.5 years. Now we have to do it. And let's never look back. Let's make it so good that people never go walk into a store ever again. And that's pretty much what I said to our team, at Metro. I said, let's do what we do so well that people will forget what it was like to even come into a building. So if we ever open up a building again, we now have three congregations. We have an online congregation, a Cherry Hall congregation, and a main congregation in East Falls. And that's how it is today. I mean, our online congregation matches almost our second site in terms of numbers.
Yeah, dude, it's so encouraging because I haven't watched like an entire sermon because obviously I'm going to my church, but
Right.
I've seen videos and content put out and it looks like ticker symbols like CNN.
Is that right? To be honest, I don't even watch it myself, so
Yeah, dude,
I wouldn't
it's
know.
I don't know who you got on the back end, but I would love to have them at our church because
Yeah.
that I was like, wow, like I'm looking at some stocks or something. Like updates are coming in, and like it was really neat. And I mean, I'm sure again, you might want to not, you probably won't credit like that was the reason why people are, coming and, serving at the church. But a big part of that was preparation. Like you guys doubled down on that. And that was
Yeah.
something that was bold. That was something that was brave. And, while a lot of churches are struggling with numbers, yours obviously thrived because, again, a big part of that was preparation and also just understanding on how you can make a situation that looks bad actually even better for you guys.
Yeah, I think, there's every once in a while you realize at some point you're living in a particular moment, and you can do several things in that moment. You can
Right.
stop and just kind of see what everybody else is doing. I think in our culture, I think we do a lot of that. We do a lot of just kind of looking around, seeing what other people are doing. And people are afraid to make a move. I think culturally, we're raised in a culture of shame and fear, especially as Asians. There's a lot of that kind of elderly shame and fear that's kind of impressed on younger people, and so you're afraid to make a mistake. And at our church, we're filled with people who've been away from the church for a long time,
Mhm.
so we don't have the baggage of like this is how it has to be done, and you're kind of free from that. And so I'm allowed to make a mistake. Your pastor is going to make mistakes, and we believe that the church is a hospital for sinners and not a museum for saints. We say that all the time, but in terms of our body language, our emotional body language, we don't always operate that way. But at our church, that's something that we're very vigilant about because, we really believe that We value the people who are in our church, and a lot of them have been away from. They don't. I mean, nowadays we're getting a lot of non-believers into our church.
Hmm.
People are just exploring what is faith, what does it even mean to be a Christian, and I don't really know. I've never been in a church before, and so that sensitivity has to be there. And one of the things that we figured was, hey, we need to um, there's no way that they're going to be walking into a building, so we have to do this well, and reach them where they are and still provide a beacon of light where people can go and say, hey, this may not be ideal, but this is what God is giving us in this moment. And I think, real leaders will kind of stand to that and say, well, what am I called to in this particular moment to be or to do? Now, like, that's all led by, you're not just kind of sitting around there and just kind of, throwing darts at a dartboard. I mean,
Hmm.
God's kind of raised you up a certain way, and he's guiding you through his word. And so you're not just kind of willy-nilly making choices. These are strategic decisions that you make because that's where God has placed you, and he's leading you through his word. And I got an amazing group of people around me that make sure that, even though we're allowed to make mistakes, they want to do their best to make sure that, hey, we're walking together on this. And so, and I'm sure you have elders in your church that are really faithful. I mean, we treasure our leaders at
Hmm.
Metro. So,
Hmm.
yeah, it we turned something that was really, really hard, and it was super hard. I don't want to underscore how difficult it was. 2020 was probably one of the most difficult years of my life. To be honest, 2021 was more confusing for me
Hmm.
because the things about trial and trouble and hardship, and you probably resonate with this, it makes you focus. But once things start to lift, it's kind of like, now what? What are we supposed to do now?
Yeah.
Hey, like, stores are opening up again, and so what are we supposed to do? And so I think 2021 was a bit harder for me to really, really like focus and figure out where we're going with this. But like, again, I think there's just been a lot of grace afforded to me. And I'm not I wouldn't say I'm the most courageous guy. I don't think I'm the brightest guy. I don't think I'm the tallest or the best looking guy or the best speaker in the world. But I think the Lord shows a lot of pity on me, and in many ways, and he's really just afforded a lot of grace there.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and we're just gonna wrap up here with like two more questions. So the second to last question, for someone that is coming to your church or for someone that is either trying to understand more about God or Jesus, right? Or someone who might have had a relationship with God or Jesus, right? And is looking to kind of seek God, right? What are your suggestions for that individual?
Yeah, I think that we live in a world that's highly you hear the pluralistic, nowadays, walking into a church is not the first thing you consider doing. When you're spiritually, when you feel off and personally or something like that, you're
Hmm.
more likely to see a therapist or something like that, right? So I think any type of exploration that you do about matters of faith, I think, it's a courageous step. And I think number one, I think plugging into a community of people that really values the gospel, that really values God's word, and that really stands on consistent theological, pillars. I think that's really important. Now, how do you know that if you haven't seen any of these things? Well, there must be people that you really admire and that you really look up to. And I would say the first step would be to go to them and say, hey, where's a good place for me to go? And don't just go for a couple of weeks. Go for 6 months. Be faithful and consistent and listen to what's going on there and be around the people. It takes a community. And I think the combination of corporate worship, which is vital, although not sufficient, it's vital for a person who's exploring and wanting to encounter God, right? Corporate worship, a steady diet of community where you're plugging in on matters of faith, not just hanging out socially, but really, really wanting to understand and know. I think who Jesus is, what did he come to do, what's his person, his work. When you put those two things together and you're immersed in that for 6 months, I think a lot of things change. And I think so. I think, one, not being afraid of exploring and saying, hey, I just don't have it together. I just don't know. I think that's like the biggest step you could take. And the second thing would be, who are some people that I can listen to hear what the next steps for me would be, in terms of plugging into a place and just doing that. Then the third thing would be just do that for 6 months. Don't do it for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
We're talking about something that's going to
Give it a
transform your life.
chance. Give
Give
it
it a
a chance.
long chance,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and I think that makes a big, big difference. It's transformational.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And lastly, Donnie, for your plug, right? Where can our listeners find you and find the church?
Oh man. I think we have
Or church
podcasts.
is, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you go, well, actually, if you go to metrophilly.org, our
Yeah.
website, I know that we have link outs to YouTube and Facebook for all of our worship services. I think if you get on Spotify, Metro is the name of our church. So Metro Sunday Sermons or Metro Sermons. Admittedly, I try not to listen to myself a whole lot, and when I do, I just plug into the YouTube. But I know that there's a Spotify podcast available, and that has it has all of our sermons, but every once in a while we'll throw in an additional podcast or something as well, and it's all there. So feel free to check those out. And you could visit us. I mean, we're at 11 o'clock at East Falls. Actually, this Sunday we're worshiping at 4 o'clock, because it's the marathon. It runs right through our area.
Oh, okay.
So on November 20th, we're worshiping at 4 p.m. But we're typically in East Falls at 11 in the morning. We're at Cherry Hill at 4 p.m.
Got it. All right. Well, Donnie, thank you so much. This is always
It's a
it's
pleasure.
long overdue, by the way.
No, no, hey,
Yeah.
I really appreciate your generosity,
Yeah.
and I just know that you're always a giving person, and I know that you highly value friendship, and character of people. So, hey, anytime I can have a chance to sit with you for an hour and chat about life is always a good thing.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thank you so much.
It's a blessing.
All right, Donnie, take care.
Take care.
All right, bye.
Bye bye.